The universe of Warhammer 40k begins much the same as our universe. The Big Bang creates what would one day become planets big and small, stars bright and dim. Microscopic organisms come to life and seed these infant worlds with great potential. But there's one addition to this great birth of creation: the warp. A mirror realm of the material universe made of pure, endless psychic power. In these early times, the warp is as empty and peaceful as the realm it mirrors. Free from the machinations of intelligent life, it too has the potential for incredible good and terrible evil. For now, though, it exists inert. For the first true intelligent beings of the universe care only for that of the material realm, and shun the strange powers of the warp. The Catan, they are called, or star gods. They are said to be the oldest intelligent beings in the galaxy. It is said they were created from the very beginning of the universe as incorporeal entities spawned from swirling gases and enormous amounts of energy, and as such are etheric creatures by nature. In their natural form, they are vast beings of pure energy who spread themselves over the surface of a star, absorbing its solar energy to feed themselves. In these early days, they were little more than monstrous energy parasites that suckled upon the solar energies of the stars that had brought them into existence, shortening the lives of stars by millions of standard years. In time, these star vampires learned to move on wings made of the gases of the very universe. Leaving their birthplaces to drift through the cosmos to new stellar feeding grounds and begin their cycle of stellar destruction once again. As beings of pure energy, they paid no mind to the hunks of solid matter such as planets, as only stars could feed their insatiable hunger. This would go on for millions of years, a passage of time so monumental as to be impossible to understand for any mortal being. Little did these primordial Catan know that the tiny mortal species of the universe, that they spared not a single thought for, at this time would be the ones to unravel everything the Catan thought to be right and true. On a planet whose name has long been lost to time, simple reptilian creatures have begun the great climb of self-awareness. While the Catan claimed the right to be the first self-aware beings, they were purely destroyers and knew nothing beyond their greedy hunger, as they drained celestial body one after the other. This reptilian species would be in control of power no mortal empire would ever come close to. These beings were known as the Old Ones. This cliché name is simply what we call this group of beings, as their true names have been lost to all beings of the current galaxy. Also, just letting you guys know real quick, I'm going to be using pictures of Pepe the Frog when describing the Old Ones sometimes, because there's very little artwork of them out there. The Old Ones were an extremely intelligent, nearly immortal race that were naturally patient. Before they journeyed out into the stars, they made extensive study of astrology and physics. This led them to be the first to discover the warp, also known as the Materium. As stated earlier, the warp at this time was a calm and steady realm that the Old Ones were able to master. With their potent psychic powers and advanced technology, they would create the warp gates, later called the Webway. The Webway would allow the Old Ones to traverse their massive empire on a whim, with only a few steps. With this power, the early galaxy was shaped solely by them, and luckily for the younger, sapient beings of the galaxy, the Old Ones were a kind and gentle species. They wished to nurture life and intelligence across the cosmos. On their travels, they seeded life on many worlds and encouraged indigenous intelligent life on many others. Fun fact, the Old Ones aided ancient primates of Earth that would later become humanity. A Catan, later known as the Deceiver, so take what I'm about to say with a big grain of salt, claims they warred with the Old Ones at this time and lost. The Old Ones would continue their peaceful journey for millions of years while the Catan hid from them, completely unable to deal with their psychic powers. The Catan and Old Ones' fates would take a dark turn with the discovery of the Necrons. The Necrons at this time were much like humanity in appearance. For their entire existence, they had suffered horrible radiation due to their planets being very close to their sun. The oldest of them were barely 30 years old, and cancer plagued all due to this radiation. Even suffering these horrible conditions, they were able to build a galactic civilization with starships to help them escape their horrible homeworld. Yet even with such incredible technology, theirs was an extremely depressing society, and that's putting it mildly. Their cities were more built for the dead than the living, as life to the early Necron was seen as a very temporary state of being. All cities had massive tomb complexes that dominated them, a constant reminder of how short their lives were. They would spend centuries looking for a way to cure their bodies, but were never successful. All their greatest monuments were built for the dead. They traveled and colonized planets with stasis crypts and slow antimatter-powered ships made with necrodermis, a living metal that protected them in their millennia-long journeys. Little by little, the Necron tier dynasty spread even further, until a decent size of the ancient galaxy answered to their rule. From the earliest days, the rulers of individual Necron tier dynasties were themselves governed by the Triarch, a council composed of 3 Necron dynasty monarchs known as pharaons. The head of the Triarch was known as the Silent King, for he addressed his subjects only through the other 2 pharaons who ruled alongside him. Normally a hereditary position, the uncertain lifespans of the Necron tier ensured that the title of Silent King nonetheless passed from one royal dynasty to another many times. The final days of the Necron Empire occurred during the reign of Saracen dynasty, the last of the Silent Kings. I don't know if I said that right, but you get me. It was during this expansion that the Necrons would meet the Old Ones. The Necrons had zero understanding of the warp, so the Old Ones seemed to them as insanely powerful beings wielding power they couldn't even imagine. On top of this, the Old Ones had discovered the secrets of immortality, something the Necrons had dreamed of since their very beginning, as they still suffered genetic cancers. The Necrons would beg them for their ways of immortality, but the Old Ones would refuse, as they saw giving the Necrons immortality as going too far against their nature. The colonization of much of the galaxy by the reptilian mystics had been immeasurably swifter and more expansive than that of the Necrons because of their warp gates and mastery of the Immaterium. That, and the Old Ones' incredibly long, if not downright immortal lifespans, kindled a burning, jealous rage in the Necrons, which aided their culture spiritually as much as physical cancers consumed their bodies. The Necrons were astonished to learn that another intelligent species enjoyed such long lives, while their own were cut so brutally short. But as time wore on, further strife came to the Necrons. Each dynasty sought to claim its own destiny, and soon the great houses were engaged in all-out conflicts known as the Wars of Secession. Had circumstances remained as they were for but a generation more, it is possible that the Necron would have wiped themselves out, as so many species had before them and shall do in the future. As their territory grew even wider and more diverse, the unity that made them strong was eroded, and bitter wars were waged as entire realms fought to win independence. After much bloodshed, the Triarch realized that their only hope of unity for their people lay in conflict with an external enemy. But there were none that could challenge the technologically advanced Necrons. None but one. Only the Old Ones were, I feel, powerful enough to in the darkness bind the feuding Necron dynasties in a common cause. Such a war was simplicity itself to justify, for the Necron had long hated the Old Ones for their refusal to share the secrets of immortality. So it was that the Silent King of the Zarkon dynasty, pretty sure I nailed it right there, in a typically bitter act of jealousy and resentment for the Necron species, declared war on the Old Ones. At the same time, he offered amnesty to any secessionist Necron tier dynasties who willingly returned to the fold of the Triarch. Thus, lured by the spoils of victory and promise of immortality, the separatist Necron realms abandoned their wars of secession, and what was later known as the War in Heaven began. A conflict unlike any fought before erupted across the stars, yet while the Silent King and the Triarch had succeeded in uniting their hateful people, it was a war the Necron could not win, not on their own. The horrific wars that followed between these ancient races is said to be able to fill libraries by future beings. but the Necrons, with their lack of understanding of the warp, had zero chance of victory. Their technology was consistently outmaneuvered by the Old Ones, thanks to their mastery of the webway portals and warp gates. The Necrons were pushed back until they were little more than an irritation to the Old Ones' dominance of the galaxy, a tiny threat clinging to their irradiated world among the Halo stars, as they were now called. Exiled and forgotten, the Necrons' fury was cooled by their long millennia of imprisonment on their homeworld, slowly transforming into an utter hatred towards all other forms of intelligent life, and an implacable determination to avenge themselves upon their seemingly invincible enemies. But when it rains, it pours, and the always fragile unity of the Necrons began to fracture once more. No longer did the prospect of a common enemy have any hold over the desperate dynasties. Scores of generations had now lived and died in the service of an unwinnable war, and many Necron dynasties would have gladly sued for peace with the Old Ones if the ruling Triarch had permitted it. Thus began the second iteration of the Wars of Secession, more widespread and ruinous than any that had come before. So fractured had the Necron dynasties become by then, that had the Old Ones been so inclined, they could have wiped out their foes with ease. Faced with the total collapse of their rule, the Triarch searched desperately for a means of restoring order. In this, their prayers were answered, though the price for their species would be incalculably high. It was during the reign of one of the Sars-Khan dynasty's silent kings that the godlike energy beings known as the Catan first came to the Necrons. It is impossible to say for certain how the Necrons first made contact with the Catan, though many misleading, contradictory, and one-sided accounts of these events exist. The ancient tomb world of current-day Necrons called Solomance claims it was a chance discovery. The Book of Mournful Night, which is held in the Black Library, one of the most secure, secretive, and expansive libraries in the known universe, claims the raw hatred of the Necrons toward the Old Ones sang out to the Catan, acting as a beacon they could not ignore. These entities had a strange understanding of the galaxy when the Necron first found them. The Necron had long worshipped a death god, whose name none remember, and they believed the Catan were the children of this god. Finally, they thought, they had allies to help them defeat the Old Ones. However first contact was made, the shadow of the Catan had fallen over all Necron dynasties. The power of these starborn creatures was incredible. It was as if the very stars had come to life. It was during these early days that the Necrons began to call them star gods. Their bodies were dispersed across areas larger than whole planets, their consciousness seemingly too vast for any humanoid creature to understand. How the Necrons were able to communicate with such beings is a matter still discussed in the current age. But communicate they did, and the Necrons knew the Star Gods would never understand the universe as they did without bodies more grounded to their reality. So it was that some would seek the favor of these celestial beings and begin the forging of physical shells for them to occupy. These shells were cast from the living metal known as necrodermis that used to be used for their colony torch ships. Streams of translucent energy would shift across space and time as the star vampires coiled into their new bodies. Thus clad, the Catan took the physical shapes of the Necrons' now half-forgotten deities, hiding their dark desires under a cloak of subservience. Incomprehensible forces were compressed into the living metal of the necrodermis bodies as the full power of the Catan at last found form. As the Catan focused their consciousnesses and became ever more aware of their new mode of existence, they came to appreciate the pleasures available to beings of matter and other realities of life. The focused trickles of electromagnetic energy given off by the physical bodies of the Necrons all about them awakened a new hunger in the Catan, very unlike the one they had once sated using the nourishing, but essentially tasteless, energy of the stars. So it was that one of the Catan came before the Silent King Zarkon, the last of his line, acting as forerunner to the coming of his brothers. Amongst his own kind, this Catan was known as the Deceiver, for he was willfully treacherous. Yet the Silent King did not know this Catan's true nature, and instead granted the creature an audience. The Deceiver spoke of a war fought long before the birth of the Necrons between the Catan and the Old Ones. It was a war, he said, that the Catan had lost. In the aftermath, and fearing the vengeance of the Old Ones, he and his brothers had hidden themselves away, hoping one day to find allies with whom they could finally bring the Old Ones to account. In return for this aid, the Deceiver assured he and his brothers would deliver everything that the Necrons craved. Unity could be theirs once again, and the immortality that they had sought for so long would finally be within their grasp. No price would there be for these great gifts, the Deceiver insisted, for they were but boons to be bestowed upon valued allies. Thus did the Deceiver speak, and who can say how much of his tale was truth? It is doubtful whether even the Deceiver knew, for trickery had become so much a part of his existence that even the Catan could no longer divine its root. Yet his words held sway over the Silent King who, like his ancestors before him, despaired of the divisions that were once again tearing his people apart. For long solar months he debated the matter with the other two pharaohs of the Triarch and the nobles of his royal court. Through it all, the only dissenting voice was that of Orkan, the court astrologer of the Triarch, who foretold that the alliance between the Necrons and the Catan would bring about a renaissance of glory, but destroy forever the soul of the Necron people. Yet desire and ambition swiftly erode caution, and Orkan's prophecy was dismissed. A Necron year after the Deceiver had presented his proposition, the Triarch agreed to the alliance, and so forever doomed their species. For their part, the Necrons soon fell into awe of their discoveries, and the Catan moved to take control over their benefactors. The powers of the Catan manifested in the physical world were indeed almost godlike, and it was not long before the Catan were being worshipped as the star gods the Necrons had named them. Perhaps they had been tainted by the material universe they had become a part of, or perhaps this had always been their nature, even when they were bound to the suns they fed upon. But the Catan proved to be as cruel and uncaring as the stars themselves. They soon reveled in the religious worship of the Necron and feasted upon the electromagnetic life energies of countless mortal slaves. Armed with weapons of godlike power and starships that could cross the galaxy in the blink of an eye through the use of quantum phase technology, the Necrons stood ready to begin their war against the Old Ones anew. But the Catan had another gift for their mortal subjects. They offered the Necron a path to immortality, and the physical stability of their species had always craved. Their diseased flesh would be replaced with the living metal of necrodermis that made up the Star God's own physical forms. Their discarded organic husks would be consumed, and their cold metal forms would be then free to pursue their great vengeance against the Old Ones, and the rest of a hateful universe, freed forever from the weaknesses of their hated flesh. With the pact between Necron Tyr and Catan sealed, the Star Gods revealed the form that immortality would take for the Necron Tyr, and the great biotransference process began. Vast biofoundries were constructed, and into these the Silent King's people marched according to the terms of the pact he had made with the Catan. What blasphemous procedures the Necron were subjected to within the raging biofurnaces cannot be known, but certainly each was stripped of flesh and soul, their body replaced by a living shell of metal, much like the Catan themselves, animated by what remained of their guttering self. Above each furnace swooped and dove the Catan as they glutted themselves on the spiritual and electromagnetic being of an entire species. It was only when the Silent King himself emerged from the biotransference process and looked upon what had become of his people that he saw the awful truth of the pact he had made. Though immortality and nigh godlike strength and vigor were his, it had come at the cost of his soul, the etheric remains of which had already been sucked down the gullet of a circling Catan. In many ways, he felt better than he ever had, the countless aches and uncertainties of organic life now behind him. His new machine body was far mightier than the frail form he had tolerated for so long, and his thoughts were swifter and clearer than they had ever been. Yet there was a terrible emptiness gnawing at his mind, an inexpressible hollowness of spirit that defied rational explanation. In that moment, he knew with cold certainty that the price of his physical immortality had been the loss of his soul. With great sorrow, the Silent King beheld the fate he had brought upon his people. The flesh and blood Necron-Tyr were now but a memory, and the cold, metal, soulless machines they had become took their place. So ends the first part of this series. For part 2, we will discuss the true start of the war in heaven. I should have it out in a week or two, and I want to correct myself real quick. The Necron before biotransference were known as the Necron-Tyr, and after biotransference, they are known as just the Necron. Sorry about that. I would really appreciate your comments and subscriptions, as it would allow me to spend more time creating this series for you. But for now, see you on the next one.